Hey, do you want to come over and make a pot of tea, bring your favorite crystals? We could talk about our birth charts, spirits, the latest house spells we've been doing. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm that witch next door. Hi, everyone. Welcome to That Witch podcast. My name is Dani. I'm that witch next door. If this is your first time here with us, I'm going to be your host, your mentor, your guide. I am so excited to introduce you to our guest today. I personally reached out to this very special witch because we have something in common that I haven't found many others yet in my circle that I share this connection with. So I'm so excited to introduce you to my new friend, Angelica. Will you say hi and introduce yourself for everyone?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, my name is Angelica Cresci. I do a lot of things on the internet, but mostly I am a witchcraft and occult educator. I talk a lot about my patron deity, Hades. I have a podcast called Diaries of a Witch podcast. And yeah, I'm just like really, really passionate about sharing and teaching the occult and various witchcraft topics.
Oh, I love it. So we have a tradition around here. Will you first off start by telling us your big three? That is my favorite to learn about each of my guests.
I'm very excited. So I love my big three. I am a Capricorn sun, Capricorn rising, and a Sagittarius moon.
Ooh. So going into business and like building your business, has that kind of felt natural and just right for you for a while?
Yeah, definitely. It was always something where I was really inspired by kind of like the witches who came before me on the internet. Like I think somebody that I was always really inspired by was Kelly Ann Maddox, who I feel like I've been watching her YouTube channel since like 2011 or 2012 or something. It's been a long time. And I just felt really inspired by people who were talking about witchcraft and tarot and astrology and that sort of thing online, and tarot readers and that sort of thing. And it was just sort of this thing that came up in my life where I had an opportunity to start kind of this career. And I was like, let's just go, let's just do it. And of course, hindsight is 2020 in the sense of like, oh my God, yeah, it all came together and it wasn't that difficult and whatnot. But I think in the moment, it probably was really stressful and really hard. I've been doing this for like 4 years professionally. But I think being a Capricorn, I have like big Capricorn stellium in the first house. And I just think having all those planets in Capricorn really helped me stay motivated. I also have a Mars Saturn opposition in my chart, which very much feels like this. Like, we're going to work, we're going to grind, we're going to love it, we're going to be resilient. And so that's definitely a big thing. I think that also impacts that.
I love that because then your Sag moon brings a lot of flavor to all of this Capricorn energy as well, for sure. Yeah. Can you share with us what are some of the types of services that you offer in your business? So you have from what I've seen, I feel like you have this very unique brand and business and offer suite. I think that very often we come across folks in the spiritual industry and we're like, oh, she's a tarot reader. Oh, she's an astrologer. You offer a lot of very interesting containers and courses and things like that. Can you share with us what some of those are?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think when I approach like what I want to offer, it really kind of comes down to like the things that I have studied and researched and just find so powerful as well. Like things that I know really well, obviously, and then things that I just think have changed my life and I want to kind of share that with others. So I do a lot of work with Glamour Magic. That is one of the programs that I'm running right now. It's called Rule the Room. It's like this whole course on Glamour Magic from an occult perspective. We go really deep and we dive into like how to work Glamour Magic from all these different perspectives. I teach about Hades a lot, who's my patron god, the Greek god of the underworld, the king of the underworld. I have a course called Catabasis. It's more of like a program where we do ritual with Hades, we interact with Hades. I kind of give you this whole deep dive into working with him, his mythology, his epithets, like the whole 9 yards, everything you'd need to know about Hades. Sort of. I also love to teach about like occult symbolism, tarot, astrology. I really like ancient astrology. I am just really, really big into that. And the way that I approach tarot is kind of, I think also maybe unique in the sense that I approach it from this astrological point of view. And I think if I were to kind of take a look at all of I'm mostly a teacher. Like I love teaching, right? And so if I were to take a look at all my containers and kind of describe them, it would sort of be like storytelling through these occult topics, like diving deep and really just kind of understanding the stories and the mythologies and the logic behind these types of magic.
Oh, I love that. I have so much in common with you there, and I relate to so much of that. And it's why I've never, even when I started out giving readings, I never really felt like a reader at the same time. My favorite clients were the clients that were interested in learning the tarot and learning more about their chart. And I was like, oh, let me just show you how to do this for yourself. And I would just start teaching them. Yes. And I was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing this readings thing. But I do love to teach people how to read tarot, how to read their birth chart. And educate in the occult. So I would love, so the other thing that I am so impressed is that so many of us, I think, have started our business not that long after some of us have started our practice. But I know in a lot of your content, you've talked about how long you've been practicing, how long you've been working with Hades. Can you share with us your trip and world? Like, how did you come into the occult world in the first place? How did you come into this world of spirituality?
Yeah, I love that. So it started when I was a teenager. I had like some experiences as a child with Hades and with other paranormal things, but I think I really started like recognizing those things when I was a teenager. I currently like live in Salem, Massachusetts, and I didn't grow up too far away from here. I grew up like a little bit closer to Boston. And I remember just coming to Salem on the weekends with my mom. My mom is sort of like one of those, I call her like a Stevie Nicks witch. Like she's not practicing, but she's like a little witchy, and she like owns some tarot cards. And every once in a while, she's just like, Angelica, I need to do a spell for money. Can you help me? And I'm like, sure. But so she would take me to Salem, and she had like a reader that she would always go to. And I just sort of would tag along with her and was really kind of like, introduced to the occult and to paganism and tarot and all that kind of stuff through that experience. I also would like go to Barnes and Noble with my friend Emily after school, and we'd like hang out in the occult section and just like read all the books, and we're like, what is going on? Like, what is this? So that was sort of where it began for me. And I think like immediately after finding out about paganism and finding out about magic, I was like, I want to practice. This really resonates with me. I was raised Catholic, but I was never like super, even my mom like was never really super into it. So anyway, I just kind of came into the occult kind of from that perspective. And the first thing that I remember doing, like the first thing that I was like, I need to figure this out, or I need to start practicing this, was deity work. I was really drawn to deity work. And I know it's something that a lot of people like 10, 15, 5 years into their practice start doing. But I think for me, it was like immediately, it really resonated. And I would say within like a year of me starting my witchcraft practice, or maybe a year or two, I started seeking deities and started kind of getting into touch with them.
Okay, so that kind of triggers my next little curious question for you. Was Hades your first deity that you started working with, or were there others that you worked with first and then he became your patron? What was that path kind of like for you?
Yes. So Hades was my first deity. He's like my favorite. Like, I love him. He's the best. Yeah, he's my first deity. And I sometimes feel like a bad like polytheist, because I'm like, I'm like, I just love him. Like, I don't need anybody.
I feel that. I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm playing favorites. I don't mean to.
Yeah, like honestly, I'm sometimes like, geez, Angelica, we gotta like find somebody else to. This is not healthy, you know. But yeah, no. So he's my first deity. It was funny. So the way that I kind of got into touch with him was that I was like, okay, I gotta like see who my deities are. Like I was just interested, and I remember like it was like a YouTube meditation. It was like find your patron god or something, like some YouTube meditation track. And I was like, we're gonna do it. We're gonna sit down. We're gonna get into it. I was more interested in like a god, like sort of like a masculine deity. I don't know what it was exactly, but at the time I just really didn't like feel super drawn to like the divine feminine. And it, you know, took me a really long time, like 10 years, to find a goddess that I really vibed with. So I specifically was trying to get in touch with like kind of like a masculine god. And Hades was the first person that came to mind as like somebody that I could get along with and somebody that I really enjoyed. But I was kind of like, well, I don't want to like put too much into it or just contact Hades. Like I really want it to be more broad, and I just want to see who comes up for me. And so I remember sitting down and doing this meditation, and I ended up connecting to Hades eventually. But I remember like Loki popped up, and I was like, I'm actually not interested in working with you. I'm sorry. I was trying to like get in touch with Odin, because I was like, Odin seems cool. Like I like, you know, but he just was not coming through. And I, you know, don't work with any Norse pantheon people other than, you know, or at all really. So I don't think that was really my path. But it was funny kind of in retrospect. I think it was like, you know, when you like really like somebody, or like when you're reading like a book and the character's like really into somebody, and then they try to like date other people to see if like, you know, it's just them or whatever. That was like me with Hades, where I was like, let me try Odin, let me try Loki, let me try these people. And then I was like, no, like it always was Hades, always was going to be Hades.
I love that. That is such a cool story. I am one of the people that practiced for probably 3 years or so. I probably practiced for about 3 years. It almost felt out of the blue how strong all of a sudden this call to work with other entities started coming on. It was just like, you're ready, now is the time. And I think I like Pinterest it. I think I looked up like how to find out your kind of like a guided meditation on YouTube, like find your patron deity. And at this time, I was reading tarot for other people, and I was experiencing a lot of self blockage when I would try and read for myself, when I would try and meditate with myself. And when I pulled these cards, it was like a smack in the face. I was like, oh, like instantly knew. And it's cool because I don't know if this is how it was for you, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was. Like, as I started really thinking about like, okay, why would this be Hades? Why would Hades come through for me? And I start like kind of thinking back on the timeline of my life, and I'm like, oh, there he was. There's that presence, like over and over and over and over again. And I had like the experience of retrospect. So I didn't really sense any kind of specific presence until I made myself aware and looked back and was like, oh my God, this was such a strong, strong presence that was there this whole entire time. Now, as soon as I embark on this world, and this is going to lead me to my next question, as soon as I embark in this world, you know, the first thing that most of us are going to do when we start working with the deities, learn more about them, start learning about their mythology and learn more about them. And wow, is there a lot of mixed emotions and feelings and storytellings about Hades. So we're going to go there because we can't not go there. First, and I think I saw even a post that you had mentioned not that long ago. I'm sure you get people that say things to you about working with Hades. I certainly have had questions, and I have definitely come upon in my own research people putting up like big warning, like, you don't work with Hades. He kidnapped Persephone and trapped her and took her to the underworld. This is rape. This is anti-consent. I have lots I could say about that, but I want to hear from you. I want to hear a couple of things. When you encountered those things, how did you feel about them? How did you respond? And now that you've worked with Hades for so long, how do you respond to folks now that bring that up?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important. So I'm glad that we're talking about it. So this does happen all the time, especially when I make a reel or post about Hades. There's very much like a dialogue about what the mythology is, or like you said, like warnings, or it's not cool, it's not good, don't work with him. So the way that I approach his mythology, if I think about like a decade ago when I started working with him, I don't really remember being like weirded out by it. I don't exactly know what I was thinking at the time. I do remember feeling like I resonated with Persephone in the sense that I felt like there were other people in my life that were making choices about me and for me. And I really resonated with her in the sense of like, she kind of goes through this big mythological quest to sort of find her sovereignty and, create that independence within her family and her relationships. And so I remember really resonating with that when I was younger. And Hades I almost felt too close to Persephone's story. Like I almost felt like I was her. So I felt like I couldn't work with her. There wasn't like, and I don't necessarily think that's true, but I think for me at the time, I was like, I feel like I'm looking at her in the mirror. So I feel like, who do I need?
What you mean.
Right? I need Hades.
Yep.
I need somebody that is part of the story, and I can kind of talk to him or talk to them about, how to experience. And I did have a lot of difficult relationships with my mom, and I still do. And Hades, I think, was really healing for me at the time, almost to kind of compare it to like Persephone and Demeter and their relationship. I felt like I was seeking Hades partially to help me work through my really difficult relationship with my mother. Nowadays, the way that I still view it from that perspective, but I do think that there's so many interesting things about that myth. And I've studied a lot of ancient art and artifacts, and I've just really like tried to go deep into this topic to like really look at like what did the ancients think about Hades, what were their perspectives, what were the depictions of Hades and Persephone in art, which is sort of how we know how they were how people viewed them. And there's so much there's so many discrepancies, and there's like entire artifact collections where they call them the consenting artifacts, which are like depictions of Hades and Persephone's marriage in a very like lovely consenting way. There's art that does not depict that, right? There's art that depicts the more like the kidnapping, the rape kind of story, right? But there's both. And there's just so much about people in the ancient world fearing death, not wanting to work with Hades in any way, not wanting to offer to Hades. There were barely any temples to Hades. There were barely any clergy people to Hades. There was tons for Demeter and Persephone, right? But there were just, they sort of were like, well, hey, we're not gonna like try to talk to him because we're afraid of him, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for me, and when I talk about Hades, when I talk to Hades about this is what he says too, is he represents the primal fear of death. And he also represents a lot of the grief of life transitions. And for the ancients, obviously marriage, for a lot of women was difficult or was a big initiation moment in your life, and it could go really well or it could go negatively. And I think maybe as a more modern society, we don't view marriage or relationships in that way as much. But that's what I think about when I think of that myth is there's that fear element that comes into it. That is just that natural primal fear of death that Hades encapsulates. And then the allegory of the myth is really just to talk about the grief and liberation of family situations, dynamics, marriage, relationships, love, desire, all of that.
Absolutely. And you know, I like fundamentally believe and feel the same way and have gathered the same meaning in my work with Hades, that because I remember in some of my earliest meditations when I was feeling really conflicted, because when I read through the myth, I am a person who can read with historical context. I can read and pull themes. I can put into frame of reference the time that this was written. It takes a lot for me to be like, you know, and so when I first read it, I didn't really think that much of it. And it wasn't until I started encountering modern people's views about it and really saying like, no, this is bad. And what was very fascinating were the people that specifically work with Persephone in almost a, I don't even know how to describe it, like anti-Hades way. Like there was almost sides and teams. And most of us, probably all of us that work with Hades, would probably let you know that that is not the dynamic between Hades and Persephone. I've never ever picked up on that before. And it's funny what you had mentioned about Persephone as well, because I had worked with her. I had dabbled a little bit with her. And then I find myself like going head first into this relationship with Hades. And you worded it really, really perfectly for even me as well. That was the energy I needed. He brought the teachings that I needed, especially at that time. For me, one of the very, very earliest things that I read were these witches and Hellenistic practitioners that worked with Hades and talked about how they worked with him on their journey to sobriety. And when I first read this, I was not in that mindset. And I was like, whoa, no. I don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. And I had a lot of fear around that. I was like, I don't have to be one of those people. I don't have to be one of those people that can't drink anymore. Because that's how I used to view that. And so for me, that primal fear of death, that was how it showed up for me. I had this primal fear of death of this version of myself, this drinking version of myself that was, the truth was that for me, that was destroying parts of my life, the parts that I loved the most. And I didn't want to look at that. And I truly, truly attribute my path to sobriety. And I've been sober for 2.5 years now. And I really, really attribute this with my relationship with Hades, because I will just say this, and I've said this to many of my clients and students. Hades is not the type of deity that you can just like throw a couple offerings up and he's like, yay, I'm pleased and appeased. Hades is like, you're accountable for your actions. Like, you live these teachings. You walk with what I teach you. And that's how, it's very different with other deities' energies where like you can kind of fluff them up a little bit. You can kind of throw them some goods or whatever and maybe appease them a bit. And Hades is, not necessarily about the flashiness. That's for sure. Definitely not necessarily about like the shell or the surface. And that's really underworld symbology to me, is going beneath the surface, going deeper to the ugly, to the gross, to the terrifying. Like, that's why this type of work is definitely not necessarily for the faint of heart. Now, since we did talk about Persephone, I'd love to ask you now, especially now, you've worked with Hades for so long. What is your relationship like with Persephone and your connection with her, especially like in regards to your relationship with Hades?
Yeah, I love that. So it was really interesting because I remember a couple of years ago, I was doing this like walking meditation with Hades through the woods. And I asked him, I was like, so is Persephone ever going to come through for me? Because I tried to reach out to her so many times and I had like never gotten a response. It felt very much like just, I was trying to call her and it just kept going to voicemail. Like that was the energy. And I was like, I don't need to have a relationship with Persephone, but I also, I was kind of like, I want to be respectful. I want to work with her. I think that I also was seeing so much, and I don't necessarily believe this, but I was seeing so much on the internet about, like it is respectful to work with Persephone if you work with Hades, and that kind of perspective showing up. And so I remember bringing it to the table and asking him about that and being like, hey, should I be working with Persephone? What's going on? She's not answering the calls. And he was like, Angelica, like that's not for me to decide. And I don't know if I can't tell you whether or not you can or you will work with her. But we'll just see what happens. And I was like, okay. And so then I got married. I got married in 2022. And that's when I started to feel Persephone's energy come through. It was like, and I kind of stopped reaching out to her at that time. I stopped reaching out to her for many years. But that's when I felt her energy. And what happened was I did a Hades ritual and I, was talking to him and I very much know his energy. And so I did this evocation and it did not feel like Hades' energy. And I was like, who the hell is in this ritual right now? I'm like, I have my wards. I've evoked Hades hundreds of times. Like, what is going on? And I was almost like on witchcraft defensive mode where I was like, yeah, let me get the athame out. Let me start banishing everything. Like, I was like, this is not right. And he was like, no. I'm here, but I brought Persephone. And the energy shift was so palpable to me that I was like, oh, what is going on? And basically through that interaction, we had this discussion about how she was kind of waiting to reach out to me until I got married. There was like that initiation that needed to happen. And obviously I don't think that needs to happen for every person. But that was just sort of my story with her. And now I still primarily work with Hades in terms of like, I am very devoted to him. I feel like a really strong, deep connection to him. But Persephone has given me kind of like a list of things in my life that she wants to help me with. And so if I have questions about those specific things, here's my Persephone altar right here. I will talk to her about it. I will go to her about it. And sometimes now I find myself asking Hades something and he's like, you should ask Persephone about that. I think she would actually be better and more helpful for you on that. And I'm kind of like, oh, okay. So yeah, that's kind of how it evolved for me.
Oh, I love that so much. So this is like perfect segue to my next question, because you talk about these walking meditations, evocations, feeling their energy, getting these messages and downloads. It is something that becomes so natural the more that you do it. And so many beginners don't believe me because it's hard to wrap your head around. It is when you haven't had that kind of a relationship, it's like, what? And I would love to hear in your words, how do you advise beginners when it comes to working on that conversational piece with their deity? Because I think that's where the biggest self-doubt and like insecurity comes through. And they're like, oh, is that just a voice in my own head? You know, all of those self-doubty questions come through. And it's hard because the real answer is learning to trust yourself. But how do you advise folks to learn how to trust themselves, to build and be able to have those what become really natural conversations back and forth between your deities?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. I think my suggestion would be to start with ritual. And what I mean by this is do a ritual with Hades or whomever your deity is and ask them to, strengthen the psychic connection that the two of you have. And I think that kind of like a spell, like when we're like, okay, I'm casting a spell for money, it obviously I believe that there's a metaphysical thing that's happening and money is now coming to you because of it. But I think it can also be so beneficial for assisting with self-doubt or your limiting beliefs or whatever's coming up for you in terms of, you do a money spell and you're like, all right, where's the money? Like it's coming in, it's so much easier for your mind to like conceptualize the idea of money. Right. And I think it's the same thing with deity work where, do a spell with Hades or sit in a ritual and ask him to, create a strong psychic connection between the two of you. I always, I teach my students in Catabasis this when we're working with Hades, to kind of imagine this thread that goes from your heart center into his heart center in ritual. Like imagine him really sitting in front of you, or if you have an icon, you can use the iconography as that, and just sit there and build up this thread through your heart center. And through that, you will be able to continue to get messages from Hades and communicate with him. And I also just think knowing how your psychic abilities can come through or how, you're getting these messages, I think can be really helpful. Like, I, for a long time, even as a tarot reader, was like, I don't even really know if I'm psychic. Like, I know how to read the cards, but like, am I psychic? Like, I had like a weird thing where I was like, I'm not, because I, don't walk down the street and see dead people and have Teresa Caputo shenanigans happen. Like, it's not happening. And so I just didn't think it was I didn't think it was something that I had the capacity for until I learned that I do. And it's been so normal my entire life that I haven't really realized how it came through. So I see images. I don't have like external clairaudient experiences. So every once in a while, rarely it happens, but I will kind of like, I can tell when Hades is when he's knocking on the door of my psyche and he's like, hey, I have a message. And sometimes it really does feel like almost like I have an audiobook in my head, like somebody's like talking and the voice is coming through. So just knowing that it's real, it's possible, you're capable of it. And just over time refining that skill either with your deity or with yourself, I think is going to be really beneficial. And I like what you said about trust, because at the end of the day, it really is just about trust.
Very often the downloads are coming through and the messages are coming through and we're just blocking it and we're just not saying them or sharing them or believing them. And so I really think that even when it was just me getting to know Hades' energy, I think part of what built that strength of understanding was talking about it or writing about it and just saying, this is what I feel. This is how it felt. This is how that voice felt. This was, I'm a Pisces moon, so mine, I feel this way. I feel this way. It's like so somatic and like internal for me in so many ways. And it really is like a difference in the presence. So just like you explained, you know, when you were doing this ritual and expecting for Hades' energy to come through, and then you're like, this isn't the normal familiar that I'm used to. Those sensitivities build from talking about and trusting that like this was the vibe coming through and saying that. And I think like really putting words and putting a label to a lot of those things. Otherwise, it does kind of feel like it all just lives in our head. I think it's kind of hard not for it to feel that way. So I would love to know, you absolutely don't need to share anything personal or private, but I would love for you to share what are some of the things that you work with Hades in, and what are some of the ways that your work with him has benefited your life? Because I think that's also where this mystery happens for some people, is they're like, what are you doing with the king of the underworld? And I'm like, everything. But it doesn't make sense to so many other people. I'd love to hear in your words, like, what are some of the teachings he's given to you, and how have those benefited you in your work with him?
Yeah. Oh, so many things. Really, like everything. Like he's all purpose. Like I feel like at least that's sort of how I experience it. But yeah, so I view Hades as like he's the Lord of the Underworld, but in a lot of ways, he's also like the Lord of like our world and our Earth reality. And I really see him in that way, where I feel like there's so much of a similarity between like our Earth environment and the Underworld. I mean, even just the idea that like he's the god of the underworld, and the underworld is sort of either, you know, sometimes it's considered like situated off of an ocean, but in Earth or on Earth. Sometimes it's like right below Earth or like under the surface. But he still gets these properties of ruling over material things and earthy things and crystals and plants. And, you know, I really like to see him as almost like a secondary or tertiary like harvest god, in the sense of we have Demeter and Persephone, but he also kind of has this dominion in a way over plants and you know, land and that sort of thing. And so for that reason, like he can be the god of everything and anything that you need help with in the Earth environment. And I feel like people don't always understand that. And even if you think about the Greek deities, there's like the Olympian gods, and they're just like, they're up there. They're hanging out like somewhere like up in the spheres or like on the firmament or whatever. Like they're just like hanging out up there. And Hades is just kind of, he's the only like Olympian era god that's just kind of hanging out in the Earth environment or underneath or kind of around here. And then there's the Titans, which are the sort of personifications of the Earth, but they're not really interested in human shit. They're kind of like, why are these people here? What are they doing? I'm not interested. So Hades kind of becomes the guy, right? He's like, oh, you're right here. Let me talk to you. And Hades also describes to me that he really hates it when people come into the underworld and, or he doesn't, I shouldn't say hates, but he is sad when people come into the underworld and they just feel like they did not do the things that they wanted to do. They have regret. They, you know, allowed certain things in their life to pass them by. And he expresses to me that he really wants to assist people in like living their fate and in living what it is that they want to do, what's sort of been bestowed upon them, you know, and that is sort of the main thing that I work with Hades on. Both in kind of a client setting. That's why I love astrology and tarot. I see it as me helping people with their fate, me helping people do the things that they want to do. I'm very encouraging of, you know, especially like artistic things and the projects that you really want to work on and the things that you want to create and offer to the world, because that's what Hades has always encouraged me to do, of like leaving something behind and making your mark and going into the underworld and feeling good about the life that you lived and not, you know, no regrets. Right. So that's, you know, what I work with Hades on. And then kind of maybe more specifically, I work with him a lot with like mental health related things, anything related to life transitions. I have OCD, and so I work with him for, you know, my kind of mental well-being and that sort of thing. And he's very encouraging of that. Yeah, just so many things, like even like love and marriage, you know, I go to him a lot around and about, and creative endeavors. Like I said, you know, I even loved what you said earlier, where you were like, you know, Hades really wants you to live what he teaches you. And it's so true. Like sometimes I'll go to the altar and I don't know, I was raised Catholic. So I have this, like, I'm very dramatic. I'm like, Hades. And I like look on the ground and I'm like, here's your offering. And I'm a dramatic Italian woman. And he's just like, Angelica, I don't care. Like you've been what I've been teaching you for a week. Like you've been doing it the whole week. You come to the altar and you're just like, he's like, this is not what I'm impressed by. I'm impressed by how you carry yourself and what you've been working on. So yeah, actions are more important than gifts for Hades.
Absolutely. One of the earliest things that I did when I wanted to start strengthening my connection with specific deities, and Hades was my first deity too, and same thing. I was like, I think we should branch out a little. And I do dabble here and there. I especially work with the cosmos and the celestials as deities and beings, since I do so much cosmic witchcraft and astrology work. But one of the first things that I did was I dedicated a specific journal to Hades, and I only wrote these letters to Hades. And I was finding myself going really long in between doing this. And when I sat down to paper, I just related to that so much. I was just being so like grandeur and formal and old school and trying to like honestly sound like someone I'm not. Like I don't talk like that at all. And I'm like, this is me honoring and I'm being formal. And I will never forget like mid-sentence, and it just strongly comes through like I didn't ask you to do this. Like you none of this show is necessary at all. Like it's about what you actually do. It's about how you live. Hades was the first energy, spirit. I mean, honestly, it was the first place I got the download and message to stop worrying or feeling guilty when I would take like breaks between witchcraft. And I use quotes because I don't think of it that way anymore. He was able to help me stop looking at it as like, you're not dropping your practice. It's always there. It's never going anywhere. Your spirit team's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. And I think it makes so much sense with what you said, because he is associated with so much of our physical world. He's like, you have to live your physical life. Like you have to do these things. And this guilt that you're feeling for not practicing, which really is like, what? It's been a while since I did a spell, or it's been a while since I dusted my altar, kind of like those are the things I was feeling so guilty about. And again, like those are the surface level parts of the craft in the first place. It really is about your mindset and your intention and what you're actually doing with the work. I will never forget him, honestly, like he's like, you are the one making this guilt happen. Like the universe is not bestowing you with this guilt. Like you can just lift it away and let it go, and you don't have to feel guilty about this anymore. And that was years ago, and I have never ever felt bad about it ever since then. And that is like one of the greatest gifts of deity work for me, is that it helps me get out of my own head. It helps me get out of my own criticism, and like self-doubt and things like that. So I would love to ask you about death witchcraft, because it really goes so hand in hand with so much of what we've already been talking about. And if you work with Underworld or Chthonic deities, it makes sense for you. But for most people on the outside, they're like, what is that? And it is kind of hard to put it in a container. Don't get me wrong. Like, it is kind of hard to box it up and make it easily deliverable. How do you personally define death witchcraft, and why do you think it's sacred and important?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and I agree. Like, working with the chthonic gods, something along this line is going to come up at some point, right? For me, I feel like death witchcraft, working with the energy of death, is really about kind of like, as mortal beings, like us coming into contact with this very sacred, very absolute force that we often have a lot of fear around. And there's so much that so many people do to avoid looking at death, to stow it away, to hide it. And it is such a part of our lives. It's like literally built into everyday life in so many ways. And I think death witchcraft is just about looking at it, seeing it, and actually working with the energy as a live mortal person, working with the energy in a way that can be helpful and transformative for your life. And there's also, I think branches of death witchcraft, which are maybe a little bit more suited towards helping people who have passed on, connecting with the dead, connecting with the chthonic gods, and facilitating the experience of death for people who are going through that right now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. When you study death witchcraft, which, that's probably the first thing. Do you have a book? Do you have a book recommendation? I'm like, as you can imagine, it's not the most popular branch of witchcraft. So the resources can feel and be very limited. And this comes from this primal fear of death. You can be a witch or not, and most humans have this, and it's something that most of us kind of almost have a natural instinct to stay away from. I don't personally utilize any of my skills or knowledge to help folks cross over. I've read many stories of folks that end up getting into that line of work. I think that death dualship is fascinating and gorgeous, and I love that it's actually gaining some momentum. I agree that for me personally, my relationship with death witchcraft is the symbology of death, because we do have, of this one body, we have that physical death, of course, that inevitable physical death. We know that's coming. But just like the death card in tarot, we experience death over and over and over and over again, whether it's in the folks that we really do lose or in the seasons of our lives that are constantly like shedding and leaving us. And this is something that I think that a lot of people don't realize they're just as naturally resistant to as they are physical death. I mean, there are that many people that terrified of change and transition and the ending of things and the unknown aspect of the beginning up ahead on the horizon. And so I think that this is why a lot of this work, and especially working with Hades, does inevitably lead you to a lot of trust and surrender, because so much of what I have learned in my time is like, baby girl, so much of this is beyond you, like beyond you. You're not going to be able to control it. You're not going to be able to do anything about it. And our natural gears and inner workings as humans is to do something about it, to control it, to try and change it, to try and prevent it or whatever. And the lesson usually ends up being in and of itself to just let go. like let go, step back, let what happened happen, which is why I really love that you earlier talked about Hades' connection to plants in our physical natural world, because right now in fall, right? We have the equinox coming up very soon. When Angelica and I are recording this right now, we'll probably be talking to you guys right around Samhain is when I was hoping to draw. Of course I had to. So this will come, you'll be listening to this in the middle of Scorpio season is my intention. And this is a time that we're seeing death all around us. And as a mom, you know, I have had to explain to my daughter, not just, oh, you know, the leaves fall off, but we've lost people and we've had loss. And I've been faced with the same choice of conversation every single parent or caregiver gets presented with, which is, how are you going to handle this conversation? Because here's the truth. We know this. And here's an innocent, for example, you know, and how do you share this truth with an innocent? When you were growing up, how was death approached for you? What was your relationship like with death? And how has that morphed now that you work with a deity of the underworld?
Yeah, I love it. So good. I love it. So yeah. So for me, when I was growing up, my mom had breast cancer twice when I was a child. So she had breast cancer when I was like 4 or 5. She was good. She was in remission. And then when I was 11, 12, again, she had breast cancer again. And she is still, like, she's good now. She's alive. She's well. She's in remission. But that was like a big part of my life in terms of, like, you know, I think especially the first time around, it was a little bit more advanced and I was younger. And I remember, like, my dad and my mom saying things to me about death or about the possibility of my mom not being there. When she got it the second time, they caught it really early. And that really wasn't a huge, like, we knew she was going to be okay. But there was still this experience where I felt like I very much had to, like, take on a lot of responsibility in the family and in the household and due to, you know, her illness and that sort of thing. I remember, like, the funerals that I went to as a child, were always very positive. Maybe not so much on the Italian side. There was a lot of, like, screaming and yelling and wailing and crying going on in the Italian funerals, but which is, I love that, like, the sacred mourning of, like, I think it's so great. But, you know, I remember going to, like, my grandfather's funeral and on my dad's side, and my grandmother was very jovial and it very much felt like the celebration of life. And so, you know, I had those experiences as a child. I have so many thoughts about this. Oh my goodness. But I think that there's, like, so many things I could say. The way that I kind of work with death is, like, it's very similar to sort of what I do with being somebody who experiences OCD, where the therapeutic medium for that is exposure therapy of, like, the thing that you are obsessive and worried about and, you know, having these compulsions around, exposing yourself to that, thinking about that, going deeper into that. What if that did happen? You know, how do you cope with that? And I think that is a really powerful modality for understanding death and fear and the things around us that we can't control. I think I've had so many thematic things in my life happen around the experience of control and realizing that I need to let go of it, realizing that I just gave away my control of this person. So many things. Like, that's probably been the biggest theme of my life if I were to kind of sum it all up. And I feel like it's very Hades, but it's also really associated with death, and the kind of initiation experience of death magic. And nowadays, you know, when working this energy, I sometimes think to myself, like, when I'm doing spells and rituals, I'm kind of like, okay, I could go about this 2 different ways. I could create transformation via death around this thing, like my financial situation or my moving or whatever it is. Like I could think about it through the lens of death, or I could think about it through the lens of opening up new doors and new opportunities. And I think to be a really powerful practitioner, you sort of need to be good at both of those things. And I find myself nowadays doing a lot more, okay, this thing needs to die and transform, and we're gonna do this spell in a very chthonic way, rather than just being like, yeah, I'm just gonna kind of put a band-aid on it and just, you know, like expansion, like instead of Jupiter, you know, like just let's expand. It's like, actually, I think that Saturn really needs to come in so this thing can really be built in a way that has a solid foundation.
Oh, I love that so much, because of our natural primal fear, most people, when you even start talking about this, see and hear everything through this like very dark veil. And I love having conversations about it that are just so matter of fact like this, because it is this natural law of our life and our universe. It's one of the only constant laws: life, death, and rebirth. And I tell people this all the time. I'm like, the only permanent thing is that cycle. And that cycle in and of itself is always changing and shifting. You know, it never looks exactly the same twice. You know, I always tell people, instead of thinking about things happening in a circle, it's a spiral, right? Just like our solar system, just like our orbit, like because we're moving, like it's a spiral. So of course things feel like they come full circle or come back around again. There's these similarities, but it's not exactly the same. And this is why death work and working with chthonic deities like Hades does so much for our attachment issues, I feel like. And these like, no, this has to stay the same, and I can't let this go, and I can't. That is something I work very, very close with Hades on my own attachment issues, especially like with the people that I love and the fear I have of losing them, or the fear I have of me being taken away from them. And exactly like you said, time and time again, it comes back to this letting go, trust. This is beyond your control. This is a time for surrender. And I believe that those of us that work with Hades feel and receive like support and comfort through that. Like I feel a very strong, genuine presence of like, I don't have to do this alone. Like even when I'm in my darkest fears, even when I have my claws like sunk into something I'm afraid to let go of, like I have always been able to feel him like right next to my shoulder, right on this other side of my shoulder. Like you don't have to do this alone. And everyone has to go through this. It's this like very beautiful reminder of kind of our collective unconscious, honestly. So my final question for you is, for the folks, and I know you're listening, my friend, for the folks that have been feeling really called to working in death witchcraft, working with Hades, or working with a chthonic deity, but are experiencing a fear. And again, I'm not talking to the folks that this just straight up doesn't resonate with, because that's cool. It's all right if this doesn't resonate with you and you're not feeling called. I'm talking about those of you that do feel very, very called and are encountering this block because it's out of fear. What advice or message would you offer to those folks that want to get started and are feeling that fear holding them back?
Yeah, I love it. Well, I think that fear is totally normal, and it doesn't even need to necessarily be something that holds you back, in the sense of you're always going to encounter the experience of fear as you're working with this energy. I remember, talking to a woman who's a medium and a witch, and when I was much younger, she was talking to me about how she sometimes when she does an evocation, or when she's talking to like somebody who's passed on, she sometimes gets afraid. And she's like this, you know, maybe 67-year-old woman who's been practicing witchcraft her whole life. And she's like, yeah, I was doing a ritual the other day and my friend who passed on came through and I could, in my mind's eye, see him there. And he really caught me off guard. And she was like, and I was really freaked out. And I was like, okay, kind of like, she was like, I can't really talk to you right now. I'm kind of freaked out. And it was just so healing to me to hear this like woman who's been doing it her entire life say that sometimes these things are unsettling, and sometimes they don't have to be at all, right? And so I just think knowing that you're okay, you're not working with this energy is not inherently something that is dangerous. I think that it could be potentially, if you are going about it in a way that isn't honoring and respecting the energy. I think if you are maybe a more beginner and the fear is maybe just coming from this place of not feeling super confident over your skills like protection and banishing, and not feeling confident as a commander of your space. I think that so much of being a really powerful, successful witch is learning how to be confident as a witch. And I think that might need to come first before you're working with this type of magic. And so I would just focus on that. I would work on really holding power in your space. And I think the best ways to maybe start practicing with the energy of death and death magic, I would really recommend like going to cemeteries and just sitting in the cemeteries. A lot of the time the cemeteries don't hold the energy of like, they don't like, sometimes there are spirits in cemeteries, like, don't get me wrong, but a lot of the times they're just these like sites where death energy is palpable, and the spirits that are, you know, of the people who are buried, they're kind of like out in the world doing other things, or maybe they're fully passed on and restful. But the cemeteries kind of are left behind as these dominions of Hades, these places of Saturn, you know, where we can go and we can sit and we can experience and feel both the peace and maybe the fear or anything else that's coming up with you around that. So I would sit in cemeteries, experience that, work with that. I would, you know, maybe recommend starting a practice with a chthonic deity of any kind. It can be of any pantheon, of any regard, just a death or chthonic deity that lives in the underworld or rules over the dominion of death, both as an ally for you if you ever need help, if you ever feel like you're in a situation where you're in over your head and you need assistance, or you need some counseling through something that you're experiencing. You want a chthonic deity to help you with that. And then they can also teach you and come through with the answers to your questions in a way that you can understand. That's the beautiful thing about working with deities, is they're never going to give you information that they know you can't handle. So if you're working with a chthonic god and they're like, you should try this or you should do this, like, you're ready, you know, and you can count on them.
That's such an important reminder. I remind people that when they do a past life regression, you're not going to be given anything that you're not meant to have yet. You're not. And also, I love your advice. It was so quintessential Plutonian. Like, I have always described this energy of Hades and Pluto as they are not that friend that's going to try and cheer you up when you're having a bad day. They are that friend that are going to sit with you and let you feel the fear or the anger or the sadness or depression or whatever, you know, the difficult end of the spectrum of emotions. And especially in our modern times and generation, that feels really foreign because most of us have been really programmed for a long time. Make the fear go away. Make the worry go away. It's all right. You're okay. There's nothing to be afraid of. And I love this about Hades' energy. And I totally agree with you that, you know, the fear is probably going to come. And that's okay. It doesn't mean anything is bad or broken if the fear comes. I think that it's important that you learn to distinguish the difference between fear of something uncomfortable and new and different and like an actual radar going off. Like, this is wrong, something is off, something is bad. And most people associate fear as that's all of those things. And the truth is that really one of the best ways to exercise your intuition is to pay attention, especially to reflect back on like past instances where your intuition was right about something and you either, you know, trusted it or even ignored it. But go back and remind yourself, what did that feeling feel like versus those times where you felt really, really afraid to do something, but when you did it, you felt really accomplished after. You know you were meant to do that. That those are two hugely different experiences that I think people accidentally conflate with each other all the time. And they think, oh, this is all I'm afraid, so this must be bad. And I'm like, and that's why I love the story you shared about this very experienced woman and witch, where it's like, no, you're still a human. You're still in human form. Like, things are scary sometimes, and that's okay. I I definitely feel like a confident commander of my space. I feel very confident protecting our land here, having dominion over like what is allowed to be here and what's not. And I still get the heebie-jeebies in the middle of the night once in a while. Like on the way back from the bathroom, you're like, "Ooh, something is, I don't know." And I can get myself worked up or whatever after a weird dream or whatever. So I love this advice because fear is not this automatic red flag. And like you said, death, witchcraft, and working with chthonic deities is not inherently evil and dangerous. Anything in this whole world, literally anything that you do irresponsibly and mindlessly, usually is what leads down dangerous paths. So it's really more about, are you being intentional? Are you being mindful? Are you being responsible? And that's one of my favorite things that I ever learned about Hades was in some tellings of the mythology. You know, Hades is like, oh, you have to take the underworld. But my favorite retellings of that is that Hades was the only one trusted to take on the underworld because he has been considered the most just God. He is the God that does not get swayed by his emotions. He was the only one, because we know Zeus certainly couldn't do it. Who could actually have neutral non-bias and decide where everyone, gods included, get to go and be sorted in the underworld, in the afterlife. And so I don't know. I'm so grateful to you for coming on here and talking about one of my most favorite things and energies in this entire world with me, because Hades and death magic are beyond special and sacred to me. And I am always so grateful for another perspective to talk about this, because it is a little niche, as I'm sure you know.
It's a little niche, yeah, absolutely. But it's fascinating, and people need it. I was talking to Jamie Wagner recently, who wrote the book Hades, published by Llewellyn, and this year I believe it came out. And we were talking about how, like, we feel like there's almost this wave of practitioners working with Hades and this wave of people being interested in Hades. And I asked Jamie, I was like, why do you think that is? Like, I'm just curious what your perspective is. And she was like, I think we just need like death. We need the collective medicine of death, and we need like to learn how to work with it. And that's sort of one of the main things that I think is coming up in the collective, and you know, experiencing it, and fear, and all of that. And Hades is the all receiver. You know, he's, like I said, he's so important because he takes everybody and he sorts everybody and he helps everybody with their fate and he touches every human life. And in a way, like we're all Persephone in that, you know, in the sense of like we're all getting taken to the underworld by Hades. And for that, I just feel like he is so enmeshed in our earth reality. And I think that, you know, I'm happy that more people are interested in working with him for those reasons.
Me too. Absolutely. I love that. Very, very beautifully said. So, Angelica, would you share with all of our neighbors here where we can find you, where we can follow you, where we can support you, anything special you're working on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram at Angelica Cresci. I'm very active on Instagram. I'm always yapping about something over there. And so go follow me there. I have a podcast called Diaries of a Witch podcast. And yeah, we post weekly every Wednesday. So tune in on Wednesdays to that show. I just, as you know, we're launching this around Samhain, right? So I just launched a Patreon. Woo! Yay! My Patreon. Go join my Patreon. So we're going to be talking about all the stuff over on Patreon. There's literally so much good stuff I can't even begin to describe. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be opening up registration for another round of Catabasis. So if you're interested in working with Hades, if you want to do deep dive into Hades with me and other members, if you want to work in rituals with me over the course of the winter and the spring, join Catabasis. It is my Hades program and it is so fun.
That's so cool. Thank you so much for your time today. This was such a special conversation. Really, really, really appreciate all of your words that you shared with us and all of your experiences. I know how many folks that this is going to help because so many of you reach out to me and ask me about these things. So I know how helpful this is going to be. So thank you so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you for having me. It was so much fun and yeah, had a lovely time.
Yay, so did I. Well, everyone, thank you so much. You can find all of the links for following, supporting, working with Angelica in the show notes below, of course. Thank you for your time today, and everyday neighbor. It always means the absolute world to me. Make sure that all of you are staying safe, that you're still letting yourselves have some fun out there, and of course, stay magical, my friend. Did you get something valuable out of today's show? Here's how you can help continue to grow our magic. First, you can head over to Apple or Spotify and leave a 5-star rating and review. You can also share a shout out on your social media page and make sure you tag me at thatwitch.nextdoor. And of course, you can just tell a friend that you think would enjoy the show and send them a link to the episode. Thank you so much, neighbor, for your support. I'll see you next time.